Cheney and on Barack Obama. And he and Susan are currently at work on another book about U.S.-Russian relations as seen through the 5 U.S. presidents who have dealt with Vladimir Putin. So stay tuned for that one. Please join me now in welcoming Annie, Luke, and Peter.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And thank you all for coming on a Saturday afternoon, especially a beautiful day like today when, frankly, there are lots of good things to do. But I think it's a testament to Annie and Luke that you're here to see them talk about this fabulous new book. I am lucky to be one of the few people who has managed to be a partner with both Luke and Annie over the years. And I consider that my great honor to have worked with each of them and both of them and to be here today with them. And I read this book back, I think, in December. They gave it to my wife, not to me, but I stole it because I couldn't wait to read it.
We gave it to Susan to blurb, and then we got a long note from Peter, who had stolen it.
Yeah, I stole it because it was I couldn't put it down. It was a great book. If you haven't bought it yet, please buy it on your way out. Get extra copies for your friends, your relatives, your neighbors. Any voter should read this for sure. The question everybody usually starts with, I know it's kind of a cliche, is, but why did you decide to do this book? I mean, the Congress is wild. It is crazy. Why did you want to live with it even more by writing a book?
Well, it was clear that this Congress was different, that, Congress has long been a hated institution with, terrible approval numbers, worse than even the White House. The president at least is a recognizable figure. Congress is sort of anonymous, and there's 535 people, and most people don't know who they are, and there's always a looming shutdown, and people hate it. But this was different. From the outset, when they made history as a once-in-a-century event where they couldn't elect a Speaker of the House, and it took a week and 15 rounds of votes, and then they proceeded to, almost default on our debt, fire their own speaker, not be able to elect another one. It was just, this is really the one that broke. So we recognized that this was a unique story. Matt Latimer, our agent, really pushed us up the hill a little bit, if you want to know why we did write a book. But and we saw it as a real opportunity to do our day jobs better, and so much, it's so fast moving. We covered the speaker's race minute by minute, as did all of our colleagues. And then finally, Kevin McCarthy gets elected, we move on to the next thing. But we found that circling back with all the players 6 to 8 weeks after, there's so many stories that just didn't get told. And that was the truth for every big event of this Congress. So that kind of became our template, that we identified the defining moments of this Congress that would matter 2 years later, and then re-reported it out, almost like oral history style, trying to talk to everyone involved. And people talk to you in a different way for a book, and we learned so much that we didn't know in real time, and it was so much fun. We had the best time writing this book. It was all crazy, and
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, this book is a cautionary tale, right? It's what happens when Congress hits rock bottom. And how did it get there, and why did that happen? And we thought it was important to really detail this and go really in depth with everybody who participated in that sort of crash of Congress, where they passed the fewest laws since the Great Depression. They spent months and months just infighting with each other and stabbing each other in the back. And so if we're going to have a productive Congress going forward, it kind of helps to document exactly why it got so broken and how that happened.
Well, you say rock bottom. That's the optimistic part of the room tonight, right?
Yeah,
optimistic
sure.
part of this talk. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Well, the best question I ever heard asked at a book talk was, who is going to be angriest about this book? And in your case, actually, you might just go through the whole index. I'm not sure. Everybody in there might qualify, but is there, in the few days it's been out, or the days since people got early copies, if they did, is there anybody who is angriest, or you think will be angriest?
Yeah, I think there's going to be angry people, obviously. I'm not sure anybody looks that great who's in this book. There aren't a lot of heroes in the book. You have certain people, obviously, who played an important role in, avoiding a catastrophic default, and all of them have been pushed out of Congress and aren't there anymore. So yeah, there aren't a lot of heroes. Probably people will be angry about certain things in the book, but we were talking with one lawmaker who was in the book, and they were like, basically nobody deserves to look good. Yeah. So I think there is an acknowledgement that this was a dysfunctional and broken Congress, and there is a segment of lawmakers who believe that Congress deserved to be broken and the government deserved to be broken, and so is sort of happy that it was broken, and want to see more of the government broken. And so they may like some parts of this book, but I would think there's not going to be a ton of fans in Congress who love our assessment of how it all went down.
Yeah, one character in the book that spent a lot of time with us, I kind of talked to him before it came out, and I said, like, I don't think you're gonna hate how you come out, but you might be upset on behalf of some of your close friends. And he said, like, whatever you said, we deserve it. Like, they don't. It was terrible. It was a terrible Congress. But I think that I know who won't hate it. Like, Steve Bannon won't hate this book. Yeah. Like, because he doesn't have voters. He just has listeners, and he can root for peak chaos, like, unabashedly. Like, the other ones have to actually ostensibly say that they're there for their constituents and to, like, do good things for their districts. So I think some of them that, like, still are not just trying to be complete, like, blow it all up nihilists will not like it, and the ones who kind of embrace that persona probably won't have much of a problem with it.
Yeah. That's actually interesting. Although you notice neither one of them answered the question. But it's interesting because anybody who's been in Washington for a long time, you guys have been, I've been here, a lot of people in this audience have been. There's always been kind of fringy characters in Congress. It's always actually kind of been a collection of broken toys and oddball characters. I think the difference, maybe some people, in fact, in this room used to be members of Congress, but they weren't in charge, right? Like, it seemed like, what's the difference between 20 years ago when you had a Jim Traficant get on the floor and start talking about Star Trek and how he ought to be beamed up and, he's kind of nutty, right? And today, when you have these, this long array of characters in your book.
Well, that reference is over my head.
Okay.
But, I think social media has changed things, and Trump has changed things. Like, that these people have brands and celebrity. Like, I don't think, like, maybe he was a household name at the time, but was he a national brand?
Yeah, he's the last the last member to be expelled. Yeah.
Okay.
Before
was he a
Santos,
national figure like Marjorie Taylor Greene? That Democrats across the country raise money off of Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I mean, one of the differences is the guys like Traficant were marginalized by the rest of the House,
and then this time these guys control it. Well,
Like,
that's about social media, Donald Trump, and the margins. Like, the reason our book, these rabble rousers and these far right members have so much power is because they control the floor, they control who's speaker, because there's no margin to work with. So they have outsized power to drag the conference to the right. The leader has to give them concessions to get their votes, and it gives them, like, great power and influence. Like, we're not just writing about these people because they're, like, they actually matter.
Yeah, like so before this job, I used to cover the State House for the Baltimore Sun, and there were, like, kind of crazy people who would say wacky things, and the senior reporters there would be like, "Oh, we don't quote them. They're not serious people. You don't waste your time with those people." And then I got to Congress, and, like, I was kind of trying to apply the same standard, but, like, you really realize that can't work when you cover Congress, because the people that seem kind of crazy and saying wild things, they're actually controlling the conversation, they're controlling the direction of the chamber. And as we lay out in the book, like, in the 118th, they actually had more power because they were the key negotiators for setting up the rules of the Congress, right? There's a whole chapters with Kevin McCarthy going back and forth with, some might call them legislative terrorists or other terms like that, but they set up the rules of the Congress to mean that if they didn't get their way on spots on key committees, on throwing out the speaker, that Kevin McCarthy could have never become the Speaker of the House. And so the Congress was sort of set up to be controlled by them.
As an aside, that's not about our book, but the lawmakers in Congress that reporters know to steer away from and not quote them aren't like the hard right crazy people, they're the people with dementia. That we don't quote because it's not worth it.
Because
like no one quoted Dianne Feinstein towards the end. It was not worth it. It was embarrassing for everyone involved. But so yeah, that's a different problem. That's a different brokenness of Congress.
We had that story with the former chair of the House Budget Committee who was still in Congress, who disappeared for 6 months, and it turns out she was found in a memory assisted care facility in Texas.
Right.
Nobody seemed to have missed her on Capitol Hill for months. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Kay Granger, right?
Yeah, I
Wasn't
think that was after she had left.
no, I think she was still in
was still
Congress.
in-
She had announced she wasn't running again.
Yeah, that's right.
So it didn't matter in the
Yeah.
sense of having another election.
Right.
But she missed 3, 4,
Right.
5 months worth of
Right.
votes, and nobody seemed to.
Yeah, so that's a whole another level of brokenness of Congress, which
Right.
isn't really about our book. But
No, you're not.
yeah.
Your book's not about that, but it's pretty fascinating in its own right. But you mentioned Kevin McCarthy. Let's talk a little bit about Kevin McCarthy, because in some ways he's such a fascinating figure. A guy who wants to have a foot in both camps, right? He wants to, on the one hand, be the responsible actor. He wants to be the old-style version of a member of Congress or a leader of Congress. Has some responsibility gene, right? Did want to pass spending bills without shutting the government down if he could help it. Worked with President Biden at one point, which of course was a mistake politically perhaps, but in his view, governing requires that. And then the other foot, of course, was he himself had been a young gun, as they once called the rebels of a previous era, and he played with, the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was suddenly an odd ally for him. Tell us a little bit about him and what you learned about him that we didn't know.
Yeah, he's sort of a transitional figure in that he's like the last of that old guard. He'd been in leadership for a long time, and I think being in leadership breeds some responsibility gene. Like you're in there for a long time, you understand on some level that we can't default on our debt, and he worked hard to make sure that didn't happen. But he also he became the symbol of what happened to the Republican Party because he was in power on January 6th, and then he was the one who went to Mar-a-Lago and visited Trump at a moment of his exile, at the moment when it looked like this is the moment where the Republican Party could turn away, and they didn't. And Kevin McCarthy was a big part of the leadership of that moment. I don't know that any of them would have done it differently than he did, but he was the one who was there and did it. So that, like, resuscitating Trump, bringing him back to life politically, so he just became this symbol of like what happened to ostensibly responsible Republicans in this Trump moment when they all just bend the knee. And ultimately he wanted to be speaker so badly. That's the Kevin McCarthy story. Like, and everyone knew it, so that gave them great power over him. Like, everyone knew that all this guy wants is to be speaker, and he'll do whatever it takes. And that was his strategy that week. Like, he knew that these 20 members were going to hold out against him, and he would give them anything they wanted to make it there. And ultimately that was like, he let them have this one person motion to vacate, which is any one member can oust you. And so the deal that got him there also like led to his downfall. But I think that he was this kind of transitional figure between an old Republican Party and the new one. And his theory of governing was like not really being a leader for a moment where a lot of voters are being told lies. Because his theory, donors would ask him like, what is with Marjorie Taylor Greene? She's crazy. She's QAnon conspiracy theorist. And he'd say like, look, if you think she's crazy, like go to her district. Like that's who lives there. Like she accurately represents her district, so she belongs in Congress. And that's who we are. So I'm going to move with the party. And that that is kind of a weak way of leading instead of, we got this question on Brian Lehrer. It was a good answer from a listener, but that like, there's nothing wrong with bottom up except when a lot of the voters who think that way are being like fed misinformation, and the leaders are not trying, are just going along.
Right. Well, Luke, talk about Mike Johnson then. I mean, I think I asked one of you maybe, I don't know, in the bureau one day, like, what surprised you about writing the book? And I think one or the other of you said that that Mike Johnson was different in private or in your interviews with him than we might see on television, that you felt differently about him in terms of his personality or the way he thought about things than he might look in the public sphere.
Yeah, and we detail in the book in some of the chapters some of the private conversations that Mike Johnson had in the private meetings in the past Congress. And there's one in particular that he has with Marjorie Taylor Greene, where the big debate at the moment was whether to send funding to help Ukraine fight off the Russian invasion. And there was this, rising opposition to it among sort of the MAGA or populist wing of the party. And Johnson had gotten all these really high-level intelligence briefings. So he talked to the top generals and the people who really understood the intelligence of what was happening on the ground. And he had become convinced that Ukraine needed this money, and it was very key to stop Russia. And basically, if they didn't do it, it would put in jeopardy Poland and even other countries. And so he thinks that he can reason with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and if he just calls her in and lays out the evidence, like, maybe we'll get her on board. And she comes in, and we detail back and forth this conversation they have, and he's trying to test her knowledge, and he says, well, have you ever been to Europe? She says no. And he says, well, have you ever been in the military? She says no. And he says, have you ever talked to any of these generals, or do you want to hear the intelligence? And she basically says she doesn't want to hear the intelligence reports. And he says, well, how can you be so against this if you're not willing to listen to these people? And she says, basically, they're all deep state. And she says, even like Trump's generals and these top people who work for Trump, they're all deep state. And she says, you would understand that too. I listened to the base, and you would understand it too if you weren't such a, and she says a P word. And so so that was what he was dealing with, right? But what's interesting about it is Johnson ultimately passes the bill, and the funding goes. But it's now Marjorie Taylor Greene who's more ascendant, her wing of the party, right? So yes, that he won that battle there, but now you hear him saying things like, basically, there can't be any more funding. He's at the speech that Trump gave to Congress, and Trump's talking about the money that goes to Ukraine, and he's shaking his head with disapproval, and so she ends up winning in the end. I think that even though, like, the wing of the party that doesn't want to hear the intelligence and wants to just side with the base voters on their impulses is now ascendant.
You mentioned, let's talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene then, because she is an outsized figure. She does have household name recognition, unlike Jim Traficant. But tell us, this is, okay, I realize this is a little catty maybe, but tell us about her and Lauren Boebert, because honestly, the Mean Girls fight in the book is rich, and you have such, you're so inside that fight, and with text messages and their individual, what makes them, they seem to agree in the nihilist version of republicanism. So why do they hate each other so much?
Yeah, you'd think, like, in the public consciousness, there's that photo of the two of them heckling Biden at a State of the Union, and so, like, they're linked. You think they're like BFFs, and they're like their politics are pretty similar, but it's just like they're competitive, and they're competing to be like Queen MAGA B of the House, and they've never liked each other. So, like, when Boebert first got to Congress, well, Greene told us, like, she thought they were going to be friends, and she reached out, and Boebert wanted nothing to do with her. And I think it's just, so the way it worked for our book is Greene talked to us extensively about this and other issues, but then in our on-the-record interview with her, she just, like, started trashing Boebert, very personal terms, like making fun of her for not going to her own son's trial and for showing up at Trump's trial in Manhattan, and, like, making fun of the whole Beetlejuice episode, like, just worse than what you saw in late night comedy. Like, the worst attacks on Boebert came from Greene. And then Boebert got forced into participating in our book because she had to respond. um,
And that is in some ways how you report a book
Yeah.
like this. Like no
Yeah.
one at first really wants to talk to you, but
Yeah.
then you get one person, and then they give their account of something, and you have to give. Then
Right.
you tell the other person
she
that
had
they
been
heard
holding
it.
it.
Yeah.
She had been a no, and then we sent her all of the Greene quotes, and they were like, okay. And then we got to participate. So anyway, they and then Boebert told us, like, I can make my own bad headlines. I don't need to be attached to hers. Like, she makes fun of her for like the Jewish space lasers. For like, they both think the other one is like horribly off the reservation, and that they
And an embarrassment to them.
to
Yeah.
themselves. But like, it's better. It's like, it has implications. Like, it's a dumb, gossipy, juicy fight, but it also matters because, like, the way it mattered was on that during the speaker's race. McCarthy thought he had Boebert. He had gotten her onto his team. He was counting votes, and then she saw that Marjorie Taylor Greene had also made the same deal. And so she tacked the other way and became Gaetz's main ally in trying to oust him. Like, she would not be, she was like, well, if she's with him, I can't be with him. So, like, these personal feuds have actual implications on, like, the government not functioning.
But one thing I learned out of this whole incident that I would have never suspected is that Democrats in Congress have a very strong feeling about this as well, and they are all Boebert people. They prefer Lauren. Yeah. So we're talking with Jamie Raskin, who's obviously
Boebert,
is
wow.
obviously no like MAGA fan, but we asked him and he said, yeah, it's like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. You got to pick one, and we're all Team Boebert.
Yeah.
And
Why Boebert for them? Is
Well, I
Marjorie
think-
Taylor Greene more offensive to them?
Yes, and Boebert is actually more willing to work with them on things, and you saw this during one of the juicy chapters in the book, which is that what we call oversight after dark, which was that epically chaotic meeting where Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene got in a bitter fight, and Boebert voted with the Democrats on that to ban Greene from speaking for the rest of the day. So that's how much
Also,
they hate each
Boebert
other.
just generally, Marjorie Taylor Greene is on an island and likes it that way. Like, she doesn't have allies. She's proud that she got kicked out of the Freedom Caucus. She's really her own, which is actually McCarthy's deal. Like, he decided, I'm gonna make friends with her in hopes of winning over the hard right. And in theory, that was the correct way to become speaker. But he picked the wrong person. She doesn't bring any votes with her. Like, she brings one vote. No one's following her. Matt Gaetz was actually like very talented at. He could bring 20 votes with him for something. And Boebert has more friends and is kind of more collegial with people. Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of is. She's just herself. She's a caucus of one. Yeah.
And then one more quick straw in the book, and then we'll get back to more serious things. But Jamie Raskin sent Lauren Boebert baby clothes when her grandson or granddaughter, grandchild was born, and they say, "I may take a lot of naps, but I'm still woke." And so yeah.
Well, one of the characters I really find fascinating in your book is Nancy Mace, because you really spin out her story in a way I haven't seen anywhere else before, because she starts off as one thing and seems to end up someplace else. And she seems to open up to you about, in a very frank and perhaps not wise way, about her own thought and her own decision-making process on this. Tell us a little bit about Nancy Mace and your what you found of her.
Yeah, I started tracking her when I profiled her for the paper in a headline that still follows me around the internet, because it's like Nancy Mace, a moderate caucus of one, trying to be something original, like some headline that
But
clearly
that's how
doesn't.
she started.
That's how she started, but that's not who she is anymore.
Not who she is.
And then I started she kind of agreed to participate long term with us in the book, and kind of we kind of had different people. I did the Nancy Mace.
Yeah, Annie
reporting on-
followed Nancy
Mostly we
Mace.
did it all together, but we had a few that we separated. But so she started letting me hang around a lot. And she was at the beginning trying to figure out, I think she was always motivated by trying to be relevant. So at first she thought a path to relevancy was like, she had beat a Trump-backed primary challenger. She had criticized Trump after January 6th. Like, this made her very appealing to the cable news, like a Republican willing to break with their party. She's she kept saying, like, if Republicans want to win elections, we have to be nicer to women. She was sort of like trying to be moderate on social issues. So this was like an interesting profile in this tribal party. But then she started to realize, she told me once, like, if Trump becomes the nominee, I'm just shutting my mouth and I'm going to disappear. And that clearly didn't happen. But then she, like, literally said out loud the thing that we know is true for the vast majority of them, but she just said it out loud, which was like, I can't move up and have a career and be anti-Trump. Like, I have a lot of difficult decisions to make. And it turned out that, like, really not a very difficult decision to make. She just decided to have a career, so she became MAGA. Like, I don't know if there is a way to forge that path. No one's really seemed to do it.
That's why her story is so important,
yeah.
right?
So she just made a, on the record, very tactical decision that she wanted to, like, rise. So therefore she's with Trump, and she's gone all in past him. Like, she started to throw, like, when they ousted Kevin McCarthy, there was a group of them planning this, and they had, like, a text group, and they knew who the first group was going to be. They had some people who were going to vote yes if they need, like, a little more vulnerable members who were willing to do it if they had to. And then Nancy Mace just voted to oust him. No one knew that she was going to do that. Like, the group planning it didn't know she was part of it. So she's a bit of a wild, she just threw herself in there. And then this Congress, she's really defining herself by, like, attacking the only transgender member, Sarah McBride, the only openly transgender member, in, like, very just horrible, personal, really, like, abusive ways. And this is, like, gone beyond. I think Trump gave an interview where he was like, yeah, the trans stuff is too much, we don't want to talk about bathrooms. Yeah. Like, Nancy Mace wants to talk about bathrooms. So, like, some of them take it further than him. So, like, her transformation is, we're with her for the entire transformation in the book, and she's kind of just sharing it all out loud. So that was fun. I think
that's such an important thing in this book, and it's so revealing, because while the cat fight obviously is fun and there's also consequence to it, the larger story is, how did they become in thrall to Donald Trump when so many of them don't actually agree with him or believe in him or think that he actually is the leader that they want to have in the party.
And then we sort of track the opposite arc too. We spend time with Ken Buck, who's one of the founders of the Freedom Caucus, a very conservative guy from Colorado. And, you know, when we met with him, he had an AR-15 mounted in his office. So this is a pretty conservative guy. And he ultimately decides to leave Congress because of the turn the party has made. And what really upset him was January 6th. He just felt like he couldn't lie about January 6th, and he was seeing that was increasingly becoming a litmus test in the party, and everyone else was going along with it, and he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And so we spent time with him, with his evolution too, from being, like, probably one of the very most conservative members of Congress to being like, this party is too out of step with me and I can't be here anymore. So he makes the other choice, and he's no longer in Congress. Yeah,
and I was glad you did, Buck, because when we first saw him come on the scene, it was, I think, as a Colorado Senate candidate, and he was a representative of the far right at that time, seen as one of the far, on the outer edge of the mainstream, and to see him now say no, and that tells I think that it's not always about ideology. It's not even really about conservative or liberal, or it's really different than that. And I think we do it because we call them conservatives because there's not really another word for it. But the truth is, they're not conservatives in the way we used to think of what conservatism is.
Right.
Anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Another character in the book is Jim Jordan, who he hasn't passed a bill since he's been in Congress, but his goal, his goal, he told me, was to move the Republican Party from the traditional conservative party to a populist party. And he saw in Trump the vehicle to do that. And so in some ways, that's exactly what's happened, right? The Republican Party has been transformed from that traditional internationalist, strong defense, low taxes party to this new populist moment, and that's what we see in Congress.
We're going to open it up in a minute for questions, so if you haven't thought of any yet, now's the time. But I want to ask about Democrats. They're not huge in your book, but you have this extraordinary scene in there that is very consequential, with Chuck Schumer having to take on his own president of his own party at a time last summer. Of course, we all saw that debate. and the question was whether the president should run for office still. Tell us a little bit about that moment in Delaware when Chuck Schumer tells Joe Biden he's done.
Yeah, that was, to me, that's my favorite chapter of the book. It's like very emotional, and it's like it's been a few weeks since the debate. Chuck Schumer has been trying to hold off senators from going public and calling on Biden to get out of the race, saying like, we're not ready yet, we're not ready yet. He was really worried about not getting it right, that like he didn't want the president to get his back up, to like get stubborn. He wanted to give him time to get out. I think he was probably also in reality waiting for polling back on his like Ohio Senate seat and Montana Senate seats. But then finally, Biden's not budging. The anger is becoming too much to contain from the Senate caucus. The White House, Chuck Schumer feels like Biden's not doing anything to prove that this was a one strange night and he's fine. And so he requests a meeting with Biden one-on-one, and he drives to Rehoboth. And in the car on the way from Brooklyn, he's like reviewing note cards, and he's nervous for this speech he plans to give. And they sit on this screened-in porch, just the two of them, and he tells him, they go through it, and he tells him everything that happened in this very heated meeting with the senators, and Biden seems to have not heard it. And he tells him, like, have you talked to your pollsters? Because they think you have a 5% chance of beating Trump. And to Schumer, he looked like he hadn't heard that before. And then Schumer convinces himself, like, he wanted to hear it. I don't know if that's true. In Schumer's mind, like, he was desperate for someone to be honest with him. And he says, and then the line that he'd been practicing, he says, like, if you had a 50% chance to stay here, like, and do it, like, I'd do it. But you are not getting the information you need, and you have less than 5% chance, and I'm urging you to get out of the race. And it's more emotional than I'm recalling it now.
Yeah, he comes in it's so hard for him. He has to go and sits in the car and cries afterwards.
Yeah, and then Biden says nothing and doesn't give an answer one way or the other. And then as they leave in an elevator, he puts his hands on his shoulders and says, "You've got bigger balls than anyone I've ever met." And then in the car on the way back to Brooklyn, like, Schumer like breaks down in tears. Like, it was just a very hard thing to do, to tell. Also, even the dynamic, like, Biden is a longtime senator. Like, Chuck Schumer was his junior. It's still like telling your elder, a more powerful person, that it's over. And then literally on his drive back to Brooklyn, Trump got shot. So like this meeting that had been highly anticipated sort of got completely hidden. But the only thing Biden said to him was, I need a week. And then 10 days later, he dropped out.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is. It really is something. Of course, a lot of people would say that maybe it would have been good if Chuck Schumer had said that a year and a half earlier.
Yeah, so that, like,
so
looking back, it's like there's been no criticism of Democrats for forcing Biden out. The only criticism is that it happened so late that it was too late.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. Well, if you have questions, we have this microphone here. Please come up and have your question. While they're lining up, I want to ask about the process of writing this book, because writing a book together is an experience. I do that with my wife. We are still on speaking terms, but there are days. What was it like writing a book together? How did you divide it up? What was your process?
Well, that's actually something I was worried about when we first started the book together, is because you hear all these horror stories of people who write books and they end up hating each other, right? So that didn't happen. We got maybe a couple arguments over time, but not too many. We did most of the interviews together. There were some people we split up and followed individually. And then, we divvied up which chapters to write. And truthfully, all like the best lines of the book and the funniest lines are Annie's lines, not mine. So if you hear something that makes you laugh, it was probably her.
I'm not sure this is exactly on topic, but in terms of populism and the hold that populist leaders have on their followers, what would your prediction be for populism in the Republican Party after Trump leaves, and would that predict a more functional party?
Well, so I guess I'll answer it like this. In the book, Chuck Schumer says something that a lot of people have described as sort of out of touch, which is and it's a chapter title. He says after the Republican Party flushes the turd of Donald Trump, I will go back to being the old Republican Party. And he describes Trump as a magical evil sorcerer who has cast a spell over the party. And in our reporting, meeting with everybody individually, one-on-one, we did not get that sense. The sense that we got was that one by one, the Republicans in Congress have embraced MAGA. They've embraced a more populist vision of what the party should be. And in some ways, they've even taken it more to the right than Donald Trump, or even more populist than Trump would have. And so I do not see, the new mode of the Republican Party going away after Trump leaves. I think there'll be a successor that comes up very much in his same model, and that's what the party's transformed into. So I think it's been taken over by populism.
Hi, thank you. I'm really curious about how you stay neutral when you are following people that are actually, I have such disdain for some of them. How do you stay with them and then able to write in a neutral way?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word neutral.
Okay.
Like, I think we describe them as they are, which...
Well, without your personality, like without you being impacted by
Yeah, I think
who
it's
they
just
are.
a personality of journalists. I worked with a colleague at Politico during the first Trump administration, and our other colleague at the time, Josh Dawsey, came back from meeting with Steve Bannon, and this other guy was like, oh, how can you sit across from him? And that guy's now a lawyer. Like, it's just, like, it's totally fair to be like, I don't want to deal with some of these people if you really profoundly disagree with what they stand for and don't want to talk to them. But I think as journalists, like, we love to talk to them, and we're not as ideological as our readers probably. And we, like, mostly we're driven by, like, just wanting to get the story, and we're scoop driven. And so, like, we just want to talk to the decision makers in the room, and we want them to tell us information. And that's, like, the overarching, like, drive for us, I think.
Yeah, we want to find things out. We want to get into rooms that the public's kept out of. We want to get the facts and the stories and what really happened. And to do that, you have to take emotion or judgment out of it, and you have to just talk to people and try to understand them. And almost always you'll find, you spend time with somebody, that they're much more complex than the caricature you believed of them, and they have good things about them and bad things about them, and and sometimes they're more in on the game than you would really realize. Like, they understand that they are sometimes playing a caricature, and they're playing a role. They're almost acting in some ways to do things that the base wants to hear, or even Trump wants to hear, and they may not always fully believe it themselves. So you do get a better sense of people once you really meet them and see their whole humanity.
Hello. This is not a criticism of the book. As a matter of fact, the book is extremely appropriate, unfortunately. What I'd like to know about is, first of all, you could probably look at the Democrats and write a similar type book.
Yeah, and there are a few chapters in here on Democratic dysfunction for sure. Yeah.
But my point is that something is really adrift in our culture. In other words, as we read about this stuff, we're not dealing with the real problems that are facing us and confronting us. It's sort of like you're describing a fight in a sandbox of who's going to control the sandbox, and nobody talks about the fact that somebody pooped in the sandbox. So this is not just a reflection of our Congress, it's a reflection of our whole culture and the electorate and so forth. I mean, this man, Trump, was, quite visible in the first term, and here we are re-electing him. So how do you see us going? How do you see us continuing as a democracy?
This one's for you.
Well, I think your point is a good one, which is to say that we get a Congress that reflects us to some extent. That's what Annie said about or what Kevin McCarthy said to Annie about Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's not that she's out of touch with America. She's part of America, and her representation and the people we have in Congress right now represent us to a certain extent. I remember Barney Frank, he's an old congressman, and he's very young. Barney Frank once, taking some criticism of Congress, yeah, but the voters ain't no great shakes either. And to his point, though, we're electing them, right? If we don't think that they're attacking our problems in the right way, in a serious way, and that they care more about pooping in the sandbox than actually trying to figure out how to fix things, then we ourselves have some responsibility there as voters and as Americans.
Yeah, and I think what we try to do in the book is demonstrate how you're exactly right that the goal for some of these people became knifing somebody else so they could get 2 rungs higher on the ladder in Congress or get a chairmanship or a key committee spot
Or a slot on Fox News or
yeah,
MSNBC or whatever.
and they lost the plot in the process, and they lost the goal of actually helping the public, and so they may pay lip service to that, but really what they're there to do is get a little bit higher, a little bit more famous, raise more money, cause another fight, get back on TV, and it becomes this cycle.
Do you see any way out of this?
I don't know. Yeah, the problem, it's so cyclical now at this point because of the way fundraising works, because of the way media works, because of the way social media works, because of what voters respond to, because of the primary system. So, it used to be in Congress that the way you got ahead was you did the work, right? You did a good job on your committee and passed bills and worked across the aisle, and then you could work your way up, and eventually when you were like 60 or 70, you could be the chairman of a committee, right? Like if you really put in your time. And now what we've realized, in characters like Gaetz in the book exemplify this, is you can shortcut all that. Start a fight, right? Get a ton of attention, go on social media, go on TV, raise a ton of money. Now you're powerful, right? Now people have to listen to you. And so you don't need to ever have put in the work to become a chairman. You can shortcut all of that. And that's the model you see more and more members of Congress following.
I really enjoyed the parts of the book about the Democratic leadership in particular. This Congress was the first time Democrats had allegedly non-Pelosi leadership, basically in my lifetime. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how the Jeffries-Clark-Aguilar dynamic is. I know it's not the focus of the book, but I was really curious if you had any insights from either the book or the rest of your reporting.
I'm guessing that's a question you don't get outside of Washington.
Yeah, the Aguilar-Clark-Jeffries dynamic. Yeah.
Well, we spent time with all of them for the book. So.
Democrats were very proud at the beginning of the 118th Congress of this seamless transition, generational transition. Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn, all 70 and plus, together stepped aside and made the way for a new younger generation of leaders. And they work really well together. There's not a lot of dissent. You don't hear, even there used to be AOC used to have a problem with Jeffries, and you really don't hear that anymore. He doesn't have, no one they're together, and their unity, they really love to talk about how unified they are. Jeffries, but now this Congress, and they thought that they were going to win the House. I mean, they thought, and they didn't. And now Jeffries is under more pressure. I'd say that he doesn't get criticism from his caucus, but from outside, all Democratic leaders in Congress seem to not be meeting the moment of that voters want in terms of a response to Trump, in terms of standing up. And Jeffries, he outlined his theory of the case, which was we don't swing at every pitch. We swing at what's important. And I don't know if that's, I think people want to be swinging at every pitch right now. So he's very calculating, careful leader. Even when you talk to him off the record, it's the same. He's every sentence is, he's very careful with his words. He's cautious. And I think that, so we haven't really seen, he's still in process.
Can I amend your question and ask about Schumer and Jeffries right now, given the vote on the spending bill where they obviously differed?
Yeah, well, Schumer's obviously in a tough spot. I mean, I don't think he anticipated the amount of anger that he would get from his decision to vote with the Republicans to avoid a shutdown. People really wanted to see the Democrats fight. That said, you know, behind the scenes in Congress, there are a lot of Democratic senators that are very pleased with the decision Chuck Schumer made. A lot of them know that a shutdown would have been probably much, much worse for government workers, that Trump and Musk would have likely used that as an excuse to do even deeper cuts and more layoffs. And so I think a lot of them were in what our colleague Carl Holst calls the vote no, hope yes group. And so, yes, there's lots of anger in the base against Schumer, and, you know, in some ways voters want to see the Democrats fight like the Republicans do. The Republicans don't mind blowing things up and sticking together and fighting tooth and nail, and they don't like it when the Democratic leaders, in their view, capitulate. But in this case, I do think Schumer has a lot of quiet support on the Hill that's just not saying it out loud.
I want to make a quick plug for the Gaithersburg Book Festival that Politics and Prose is a huge sponsor for, and they have great authors, and it's a free event May 17th at Borough Park in Gaithersburg. So if you've never been there, I highly recommend it. Now, I do not in any way advocate what is going on with Doge and this country, okay? I want to be upfront about that. But I worked for the U.S. Capitol Police, and back in the 80s, and I would sit in the Senate chamber and the House chamber up in the galleries, you know, watching what was going on. And they were saying that if we don't get entitlements under check, that it will just consume so much of our budget and all. And so, you know, maybe all of you are aware of that, but maybe you're not.
Yeah.
And then one other quick note, you mentioned the AR-15. I was in Charlie Wilson's office one time escorting I don't know who it was, somebody, you know, from the government. And I saw what looked like a rocket launcher up on the wall. And I thought, what is this doing in the Rayburn House office building? And then after read George Crowell's great book, Charlie Wilson's War, then I realized, oh, the Mujahideen, you know, gave him that. So, thank you.
That's a great story. Yeah, I mean, it is true that the national debt is ballooning all the time, and that is a real issue that some Congress needs to tackle. What we've seen so far from Doge is that they are not tackling the debt in any real way, that they are making cuts that are, and many people find, really painful, and but that it is, you know, it's decimal dust when you look at the entitlement programs. So, and in fact, in the budget bill, Trump's budget bill, it raises the debt by $4 trillion. So this is, it looks like they're slashing a lot, and certainly they're inflicting a lot of pain on the federal workforce, but they are, if you're talking about cutting the debt during this, that's not what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that like 70, you know this, most people in this room probably know, 70% of the federal budget are just a handful of things, right? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Pentagon, and National Debt Service, right? And so what Doge and Trump are focusing on is a tiny fraction of what the overall budget will be. Everybody's excited about the USAID because for a very small amount of money, frankly, we got a lot of impact around the world. The truth is, it's less than 1% of our budget. You get rid of everything that's discretionary, you're still not going to get rid of the deficit. So if you don't take a look at the entitlement programs, military spending, perhaps taxes, the bigger picture things, the Doge stuff is just eating around the edges at best in terms of that larger problem. And so it's not about that. What's it about? It's about the chainsaw. What do they want to send as a message? They're sending that chainsaw message. We are taking a chainsaw to government. Is it a thoughtful examination to say, hey, this department doesn't make any sense anymore, we ought to think about getting rid of it, maybe we ought to move these functions over here? That's all legitimate. Government's done that repeatedly through the generations. No, what it is one guy walking in the building saying, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, without having given it some thought. And I think that's the real discrepancy between serious governing and what we see going on right now.
Is there any move in Congress, even a nascent one, on voter reform? Because I hear this stuff, the voters are responsible for putting these people in office. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district is gerrymandered up the wazoo. Would she be if it was a fair election? People in this room, we live in Washington, D.C., we have no representative in Congress. We all know the arguments about the Senate, that South Dakota has 2 representatives, 2 senators, so does California. Is there any serious cabal in the Congresses that exist today to address these probably very basic issues?
I don't think so in this Congress. The issue that you raised, though, I mean, some states have gone to ranked choice voting, right? There are some other, there have been talk in some states about gerrymandering reform and going to independent commissions and that sort of thing, but most of that action has been on the state level. Yeah, I don't think certainly not this Republican-controlled Congress is going to want to go to ranked choice voting. I think they would probably want to ban ranked choice voting if they could. The question is maybe one day or maybe at the state level, but I don't see that happening in the next 2 years.
We got like back here. Can you come up to the microphone so we can hear you and record you?
I'm going to circle back to when you were talking about Nancy Mace from South Carolina, and she has proposed legislation that would make non-consensual sex films illegal, and I think that most of the population would benefit and support that. And if we end up in fighting about bathrooms again, the Democrats will lose the election again. And I'm from North Carolina, and our legislators are all Republicans, and they're proposing that again. They're trying to draw us into a fight about that. And what we need to do is support moderate bills like Nancy has. And I do not think that she's fighting for her career. She is not a far-right Republican, no matter what she says publicly. She's trying to stay alive in a state that isn't supporting her.
Yeah, well, she is running for governor, so she's trying to stay alive, relevant. That's true. I do think you're right about Democrats talking about bathrooms is not a winning thing. And we've seen, I think Sarah McBride the woman that she's been targeting has been really aware of that and trying not to she is not trying to talk about trans issues. When they banned her from using the bathroom in the Capitol, she just said, I'll respect that, done. I'm not here to talk about bathrooms. She purposefully has, she didn't speak on they took a vote recently on banning trans athletes from women's sports, and Sarah McBride did not speak on the floor on that issue. She's trying to talk about economic issues that she talked about on her campaign. They call her gentlemen. The Republicans routinely now, when she speaks on the floor, introduce her as the gentleman from Delaware, and she lets it go. She doesn't want to get drawn into this. So I think that's a realization that these issues are a ploy, and we don't want to talk about them. We want to talk about economic issues.
And I think Trump said he planned to, a week before the next election or 2 weeks, to bring out men and women's sports again. To make that the main focus once again. So the Republicans clearly see that as their dividing culture war issue that they think they can win elections on, and so they're not, he's going to bring it out the last minute again. So I think we should fully expect that to happen.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you guys coming. I want to thank Brad and the whole Politics and Prose team here for having us. Luke, Annie, congratulations on a fantastic
Thank you
book.
for doing this
really
with us.
Wonderful. Please buy the book, and not only buy the book, follow them in the paper. You're not going to be sorry for that. They're the best we got.